Welcome to NFL Fantasy Live. I'm Marcus Grant with Cynthia Freeland, Kimmy Checks, and Adam Rank. So everybody grab your stevia. It is time for some TNFT, and we will start with Carolina Panthers running back Christian McCaffrey. He will not be activated from injured reserve for tonight's game against the Falcons. That's per sources. According to our own Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero, CMC is working towards a return from the ankle injury that has sidelined him since week 2. He was considered a long shot to play all week. Let's go back through the fantasy record books to find the highest scoring Panther on Thursday Night Football. And surprise, surprise, it's Christian McCaffrey. He had 138 yards from scrimmage and 3 touchdowns in week 10 of 2018. His 36.8 fantasy points was actually second among running backs that week, finishing behind David Johnson's 37.3. Your highest scoring Falcon is Roddy White, who also went off in a week 10 game. This one back in 2010 against the Ravens. White had 12 catches for $138 and 2 touchdowns, all totaling 37.8 fantasy points. Oh, by the way, Roddy finished as the number 1 wide receiver in 2010. The closest Falcons player to White since then is Julio Jones, who scored 37.1 in week 3 of 2014. Our final sip of tea is a mix of ice and water. Matt Ryan is your QB 14 this season, while Teddy Bridgewater is QB 22. Matty Ice is averaging just under 19 fantasy points per game to Teddy's 16.9. And if week 8's QB1 happens to come out of this game, might the odds be in Ryan's favor? He has 6 QB1 weekly finishes in his career compared to Bridgewater's 0. All right, cups down, forks up. It is time to feast or fade. I'm going to give you a player in tonight's matchup, and you guys are going to tell me whether or not he is going to feast or whether he should be faded from fantasy rosters. Okay, so rank the highest scorer on either team fantasy-wise this season is Calvin Ridley. Feast or fade against the Panthers?
Well, I'm going to say feast, and I also want to mention one thing. Those uniforms that Roddy White was wearing, why are those not the uniforms that these guys are wearing? Not that this look is terrible, but I thought the red helmets looked really sharp. But Calvin Ridley has been one of the best wide receivers this season. A lot of us predicted that he was going to have a Chris Godwin-like breakout, and he's currently the wide receiver 4. He's the only receiver in the NFL with at least 16 fantasy points in 6 games this season. The last time he faced this club, he had close to 22 fantasy points, so he's absolutely going to feast.
All right, Kimmy. Hey, Mr. DJ Moore. Is it feast or fade for him?
I am feasting all over DJ Moore tonight. Moore has had 14-plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. Now, he put up an almost 20 fantasy point performance the last time that the Falcons and the Panthers met back in Week 5, finishing as the wide receiver number 10. Now, the Falcons' defense is allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season, and though Robbie Anderson is still in that receiving core mix, he has not gotten a touchdown since Week 1. So I do think that DJ Moore gets the bulk of the receptions and the red zone opportunities tonight.
Okay, Cynthia, we go back to the Falcons side, and Julio Jones, is he a feast or fade?
I'm going with feast. I understand sometimes we're worried. He was on the injury report. He is no longer on the injury report. It is all go, not even a questionable, no cues about it. So you want to go ahead and play him 17-plus fantasy points in 2 straight games. Led Atlanta in targets in both of those games. Do I love when I see the injury report? No, but I'm not worried about it in this case. I repeat, I am not worried about it in this case.
All right, I'm going to go with Robbie Anderson, and I'm going to tell you that I think he is going to feast. I mean, we have been picking on the Falcons secondary all season long for good reason, giving up the 2nd most receiving yards to wide receivers this year. Anderson himself has had 8 or more targets in 5 of the 7 games he's played. He's had 70 or more receiving yards in 6 of 7. When these teams met back in Week 5, Robbie Anderson went off for 8 catches and 112 yards. All right, back around again. Adam Rank, how are we feeling about Todd Gurley? Is he a feast or fade?
Oh, he's going to feast. I mean, this guy can't help but score touchdowns. Like, that's how good he is this season. Like, even when you tell him not to, he's like, I'm just going to do it anyways. And by the way, we don't care whether the Falcons win or lose. So I'm glad he got into the end zone last week. I got your back, Todd Gurley. He has 7 rushing touchdowns this season. That's tied for the most amongst running backs. He's had at least 15 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. And the Carolina Panthers have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs this season. The only guy I can think of who didn't really score that well against him was David Montgomery a couple of weeks ago. But I anticipate Todd Gurley having another huge game against the Panthers.
All right, Kimmy, let's stick with running backs. We know that Christian McCaffrey's not playing, so this might be the last hurrah for Mike Davis. Is he a feast or fade?
He's a feast because, as you said, with CMC out, the stock is still hot for Mike Davis. Now, since week 3, Davis is the fantasy running back number 6, averaging 19 fantasy points, even with last week's disappointing performance. Now, back the last time that these two teams faced off, Davis finished with just under 30 fantasy points and a touchdown. Now, with Atlanta allowing the 3rd most receptions a game to running backs, David will heavily be featured, and you can count on him to produce.
Well, I think a lot of fantasy managers hoping for one last big score from Mike Davis before Christian McCaffrey comes back. Later on in this hour, Cynthia will give you her winning daily fantasy lineup in Best Day Ever. So stick around for that. In the meantime, it is Thursday Night Football. Matt Ryan leads the Falcons into Carolina to battle Teddy Bridgewater and the Panthers. Tune in 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NFL Network, Fox, and streaming on Prime Video. And don't miss NFL Game Day Kickoff coming up right after us at 6 p.m. Eastern. Let's turn to some headlines in case you missed it. Vikings running back Dalvin Cook has been back practicing in a limited fashion this week as he hopes to make his return on Sunday against the Packers. Cook has been out since a Week 5 groin injury that at the time wasn't considered to be serious. So, Kimmy, if he comes back, do you expect the Vikings, or the Packers defense for that matter, to let Dalvin cook?
Yes, Dalvin is going to cook because he is continuing to trend upwards, and it looks like he will be suiting up on Sunday against the Packers. Now, Green Bay, they struggle with controlling the opposing offense's run game, allowing the most fantasy points per game to the running back position. So even with Cook missing a few weeks and returning from an injury, he is absolutely a must start and can still manage to do plenty of damage, even if he does see less snaps than he did pre-injury.
All right, over to Pittsburgh. Steelers wideout Deontay Johnson is still not practicing with an injured toe. Johnson put up his best game of the year last week against the Titans, scoring 29 fantasy points. Keep an eye out to see if he is going to be on the practice field tomorrow. Meanwhile, Juju Smith-Schuster is still dealing with his injured knee. He didn't practice Wednesday, but today he did practice in full. Rank, this rivalry with Pittsburgh is taking on Baltimore. This is rivalry week against the Baltimore Ravens. You imagine Juju's going to be a go. What are your expectations for him in the midst of what's been a frustrating season?
Yeah, as you said, he's had fewer than 7 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. He's not getting targeted enough. There's other guys who are taking away some of his opportunities. We've seen Deontay Johnson step up last week. Chase Claypool, of course, had a couple of nice games. And really, I look at this Ravens defense, and it's one of the best in the NFL. They've allowed 3 receiving touchdowns this season. That's tied for the second fewest. So I don't have a lot of high hopes for the Steelers passing attack because it's just been efficient. It hasn't been like it was back in 2018 when they attempted the most passes for an entire year. It's just been good enough to go out there and win games. So I'm going to try to avoid it if it's possible.
More wide receiver news. Michael Thomas was back at practice today with his ankle and hamstring injury. So, Cynthia, if he is finally back for us on Sunday against the Chicago Bears, what kind of projection do you have for him?
So I have kind of a middling projection in terms of what you expect from Michael Thomas. 5 receptions, 54 yards, and the elusive touchdown. As you know, the Bears are not a great touchdown giver to opposing wide receivers. They've only allowed 2 receiving touchdowns this year, 2 wide receivers. But this is kind of like an angry Michael Thomas, right? He went through some discipline. He had that injury. He's battling back. I think this is the type of situation where we've seen his motivation and his ability to create yards after the catch just absolutely make him phenomenal in these situations. So I think he gets that 3rd touchdown against the Bears.
A lot of folks would love to see it after waiting for him to come back. Meanwhile, Patriots wide receiver Julian Edelman had surgery on a knee that's been bothering him all season long. That's according to Ian Rappaport. Edelman will miss this week's game against the Bills. How long he's out, though, remains to be seen. So, Rank, give fantasy managers who might have Edelman on their roster a bit of an escape clause for the short term.
Yeah, well, we were probably going to start him anyways, so this is probably fine because the Bills have been really tough against receivers, so I wouldn't look for anybody on this Patriots roster. Instead, I would turn my attention to Scotty Miller, who's playing with the Patriots' former quarterback. Now, Chris Godwin is not going to be playing in this game, which means there's more opportunity. Miller has been kind of a hit or miss type of player. He's had 19 fantasy points in 2 of his 4 games. He's also had less than 2 in the other 2 contests. So to me, I guess if you're watching this game and he gets the 3 points, you're stoked because you're like, oh my gosh, he's going to get 19 now because this is the way that this goes. Although he could fumble and lose, whatever. I just think that Scotty Miller's there. I also like Nelson Aguilar Rashard Higgins. You know, there's some good guys out there. So I think there's some good matchups, but Scotty Miller is the one I'm focusing in on right now.
I know we'll talk a little bit about Nelson Aguilar a little bit later on in the show. Aaron Jones remains sidelined at Packers practice on Thursday with a calf injury. He's now looking doubtful for Sunday's game against the Vikings. So, Rank, we'll stick with you. If Jones can't go, does Jamal Williams become a must-start for fantasy managers?
I would think so. The Vikings are kind of middle of the road in production to running backs this season. I think that the one thing that really separated Aaron Jones from Jamal Williams is that his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, especially when they got near the red zone. So I think that this could help out somebody like Robert Tonyan, who really didn't do much last week, and a lot of that had to do with Devontae Adams returning, but he could get some more red zone opportunities this week if you're looking for a tight end. But again, Jamal Williams is probably very safe.
More running back news. Bengals running back Joe Mixon did not practice today with an injured foot that kept him out last week against the Browns. It doesn't look good for his prospects to play this week against the Titans, but tune in to NFL Fantasy Live tomorrow for an update. Kimmy, though, your thoughts on the matchup for Mixon Sunday if he is able to go?
Well, if he is able to go, maybe you should temper your expectations because we don't know how serious this injury is. And like you said, he's missed 2 straight days of practices. So, you know, I want to focus my attention a little bit differently on Gio Bernard because if Mixon doesn't go, Gio will be the RB2 versus the Titans on Sunday because the Titans have allowed a top 25 fantasy running back in every single game this season.
News out of Dallas. Cowboys quarterback Andy Dalton remains sidelined in today's practice with a concussion that he suffered last week. Dalton is not trending in the right direction to play Sunday night against the Eagles. This means the Cowboys could ask rookie Ben DiNucci to make his first NFL start. And if that is the case, I would suggest running out and trying to get the Eagles defense when and where you can. They're available in about 44% of NFL.com leagues, and they're facing a Cowboys offensive line that because of retirements, because of injuries right now is a mess. Of course, with that defense also being bad, it could make the Cowboys defense a little bit one-dimensional, which might make them a little bit easier to defend. After a Dolphins bye week, rookie quarterback Tua Tagovailoa will make his first NFL start Sunday against the Rams. Tua got some mop-up action in Week 6, completing both of the passes he attempted. Cynthia, what projection do you have for the Rook against the Rams defense? That's the 7th stingiest of fantasy quarterbacks, giving up just over 16 fantasy points per game.
A little more than the 9 yards that he had against the Jets, 241 yards to be exact, 2 touchdowns, a pick, and 41 rush yards. I don't love his O-line, which means there's going to be a lot of shorter passes, a lot of quick tempo, a lot of Myles Gaskin helping him out. I like this projection, though. I have it in my top 12 in terms of total quarterbacks for the week. This is risky, but it has a lot of upside.
Hey, rookies, it's time to raise your game, presented by EA Sports Madden NFL 21. Cynthia is here with me, and we are going to share who we think will be the top scoring rookie running backs and wide receivers for the week. So, Cynthia, give me your top first-year RB and WR.
I get to talk about a Detroit Lion? Okay, DeAndre Swift. He's been really good to me, and I think that continues again in this matchup. Now, Indianapolis, they have a tough defense. However, they've allowed a top 15 fantasy running back in 2 straight games prior to their bye. And of course, Swift had 3 rushing touchdowns in the last 2 games. But the thing I really care about are those 15 touches per game over the last 2 games since the Lions bye. I think that means up arrow on the trend for Swift.
And your wide receiver?
Oh, and now you want my receiver too, because I'm going to tell you that one. My receiver is Justin Jefferson in this one. I loved this LSU grad coming out. The interesting thing for me about him is when you look to see where the Packers are vulnerable, it's really all about the routes that Justin's been really exceptional in so far this season. He has a 25% target share since week 3. That ranks 9th among wide receivers in the entire league, and he has 100 or more receiving yards in 3 of his last 4. So I think this is a very good pick in what should be a game featuring a lot of passes.
Well, I'm going to keep the wide receiver theme going and talk about T. Higgins here. I mean, over the last 4 weeks, the Tennessee Titans have been the most forgiving defense against fantasy wide receivers, giving up the most fantasy points per game to the position. Over that same stretch, Higgins himself is a wide receiver 17. He's had 4 or more receptions and 70 or more yards in 3 of the last 4. The Bengals, one of the highest passing volume offenses in the league, so I expect Higgins to get plenty of looks this week. And my running back is going to be Jonathan Taylor. We're still looking for the true JT breakout game. It could happen this week against the Detroit Lions. The Lions, not a great matchup for quarterbacks, and Phillip Rivers has been struggling to boot. So over the last 4 weeks, though, the Lions given up the third most fantasy points per game to running back. So this could be a week where we see Frank Reich and that offense really unleash their rookie running back. All right, so we go from the young and the restless and check out the old and accomplished.
Russ takes the snap. Looks, gonna let it fly. Downfield, Tyler Lockett is out there. Lockett makes the catch in the end zone. Touchdown, Seahawks! How does he get open? How does he do that? Tyler Lockett is amazing. And the perfect pass from Russell Wilson, a 47-yard shot, and a perfect pass. Lockett with his second score of the night.
That was your top stack from week 7, combining for the most fantasy points we've seen from a stack this season, over 82 of them. And it's actually the second time that we've seen Danger Russ and Tyler Lockett at the top of our stack list. But Adam Rank and I are here to dish you out our favorite stacks for this week's slate of games. Rankadoodle, kick us off.
Well, I kind of want to do a little bit of a contrarian play, but I think this might end up being a hipster type of pick. Because I'm going to go with Jimmy Garoppolo in that crush matchup against the Seattle Seahawks, who've allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. They've allowed a top 12 quarterback in 5 of 6 games this year. So I kind of like Jimmy G. And so when you're trying to pick the receiver, I'm going to go for his best pass catcher, who is George Kittle, who has had 9 targets per game this season. That's second most amongst tight ends. He's leading all tight ends with 87 yards per game. And I know if you look at the FPA and you might think that Seattle's tough on tight ends, it doesn't matter because George Kittle is a different person. So this is it's an opportunity to play GKO and I'm into it. And so that's going to be my first stack.
All right, I love that. Adam Rank, a hipster. We never would have guessed on that one. All right, I want to talk about my first stack. It's Ryan I'm talking. It's Ryan Tannehill to A.J. Brown, and they are going up against the Cincinnati Bengals this week. Now, Ryan Tannehill has quietly been one of the most consistent fantasy quarterbacks this season, having at least 2 touchdown passes in 12 of his last 13 games. Now, just in the last 2 games combined, the Cincinnati Bengals have given up 8 passing touchdowns, which bodes well for A.J. Brown, who has had 7+ targets in every game this season and has put up 21 fantasy points in 3 straight games. Rank, now you can talk again. Now it's your turn again.
Now I'm allowed to interject here. You can go triple stack too. You can go Jonnu Smith or Derrick Henry in that one, and I think that would work out pretty well for you. I think that's going to be like a 45-40 game. So I like that. I also like the Buffalo Bills this week, and I'm going to go with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs because this seems like an opportunity for the Bills to step forward and say, listen, this year is now our year. We're going to take over the AFC. We're going to go against a team that's beat us up for the past decades and go out there and really put up a huge performance. Now, obviously, Josh Allen has been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks this season. He's tied for second amongst fantasy signal callers with at least 25 fantasy points in 4 games this season. And Stephon Diggs, we don't talk enough about how good he's been this year. He's a top 10 wide receiver, and I kind of wish Justin Jefferson wasn't so good so I could make fun of the Vikings for this, but it actually has worked out for both teams. And I think it's going to work out for you this week if you play this stack.
Ooh, okay, I like that. That's a little spicy going up a tough Patriots secondary. But let me get my last stack of the week. You're going to love this one out of break. Is Aaron Rodgers, your boy, and Devontae Adams going up against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Roger has been Rogering, throwing 17 passing touchdowns just this season. Now, back in week 1, when these two teams faced off last, it was Rodgers' season-high game in terms of fantasy points, racking up just over 30 of them. Now, Rodgers and Adams aren't new to this top stacks list. In the 4 games that Adams has played this season, he has had 4 touchdowns to match them, and he is the only player in the NFL with 40 fantasy points in 2 games this season. Adam Rank, your favorite team, the Green Bay Packers, they're going to do it this week. By the way, join Adam and I every single Thursday. We have a show that we do together. It's really fun. It's called Fantasy Bites. You can tune in and watch on NFL.com within the NFL Fantasy app, or go to youtube.com/NFL Fantasy Football. Marcus, back to you.
And we're hoping to see that this game makes this the best day ever. Cynthia is here now to help us set a daily lineup for this Falcons versus Panthers contest. So we'll start, as we always do, with your MVP. Which player are you pegging to get you 1.5 times the points?
Usually I look for a quarterback, but the best ROI in this one is Robbie Anderson. So you're going to want to take the wide receiver, slide him into that MVP role, and then expect him to get, I don't know, something like 16, 17, and then you get 1.5 times points of that. So let's just call it a nice 25 base layer for your MVP. Why? Because Atlanta, who's allowing the second most receiving yards per game to wide receivers this season, is going to get tricked by Robbie Anderson. You're kind of buying him at a lower price, especially like the stock market. You have to know when to pounce.
All right,
and then you got to look to your flex. Yeah.
Sir Purr digs that pick. Yeah, I was going to say, who are your flex players? Because you do get a kicker if you choose to.
Well, I don't want a kicker, but I do want Teddy Bridgewater to take care of that. And I do want Matt Ryan because I want both of the quarterbacks. They earn you typically the most points. And in this game, which is supposed to be a high-scoring game, and my model confirms should be a quite high-scoring game, both teams are going to have to be throwing. Players come to play on Thursday night. Matt Ryan is one of those players. I like to see that Carolina has allowed a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 2 of their last 4, so I like the upside here. And then you got to round out your portfolio with Julio Jones, and that leaves you just enough room to get Curtis Samuel. This is a nice portfolio. You got a lot of upside. This is like, you buy on the low side of the stock market, and then you get the nice big upside of the stock market, once things go up.
Curtis Samuel, kind of a jack of all trades there for the Panthers offense, and hopefully he's good enough to help you make this the best day ever.
It is time once again. Here comes the hype train to bring you some fantasy zen. And the name is Rank, Adam Rank, and my guy Marcus Grant and I have sold hype trains from Brockway to Ogdenville and North Haverbrook.
And by golly, we've put them on the map.
Now let's fire up the hype train. Let's get the power tilting full max. Because this is the segment that has been endorsed by the most USC Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks. Marcus, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Come on, Marcus, I need you to feel it.
I'm ready, but you're going to feel it if you don't get off the track.
Hey, here they come. Let's get out of here.
The time has come to wake up my son who is in the next room. But we will start in the big, you see. I've got one of the top wideouts for our guy, Jimmy G. Not Kittle, we talked about him earlier, but one of the wideouts. He's got the hands, the hops, the dude can fly. The perfect elixir if you have DeAndre Hopkins on a bye, or Will Fuller, or Christian Kirk, or whoever. We are giving you a guy, a dude who is no random, and I can't believe I'm trying to rhyme this with Brandon. Show me Brandon Ayuk.
I'm totally on board with Brandon Ayuk this week. I mean, you talked about George Kittle and that stack with Jimmy Garoppolo. Mostly because we've been picking on the Seahawks all season long. Throw in the fact that Deebo Samuel's got a hamstring injury that's going to keep him out. They've been finding creative ways to get Ayuk the ball. I'm totally on board with this one this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about this matchup earlier in the show, the Seahawks are giving up so much production. We saw what happened last week with DeAndre Hopkins. We saw what happened with Christian Kirk. Multiple guys can eat in that offense. So I think we're both on board. We love that one. All right. So we got another one because I know wide receiver is a big thing this week. And there was a time where you would say this guy you would say his name as a slight, but the dude has been balling, and now that ain't right. He's had 14 points in at least the last 3 games. I picked him up so fast. My phone was shooting flames. I might have used that joke before, but who cares? It's getting that time of year. So, I got it. I lost my place. I was doing this on the fly. So why don't we just roll the animation for this next guy? Show me Nelson Aguilar.
That was pretty sweet. I'm on board with Nelly Swag too. Look, I know that we all like to post a fun GIF every time he does something, but it stops being a joke. The guy's playing really well. He's led the team in receiving yards over the past 3 games. He's got touchdowns in 3 straight games, and he's got a great matchup against the Browns, who are giving up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So let's stop making fun of him. Nelly Swag is balling out now, and he should be on fantasy rosters.
Yeah, such a great matchup against the Cleveland Browns this week as well. As another guy along with Scotty Miller in that group that you can pick up this week if you are missing a wide receiver. So let's try to get my composure back one more time, because it's the time of year when we need an RB. The line is growing long. Please step behind me though. So I got a guy who I loved in college, but I'm not sure if I'm a fan. So please, Marcus, tell me, are we going to start Wayne Gallman? That's his name. Show the animation, Tina.
No, we can't get down with Wayne Gallman. I mean, look, the upside is he could get more touches if Devontae Freeman can't go. Freeman's been dealing with that ankle injury, so we could see more Gallman. The issue is the matchup is awful. I mean, the Bucs have been locking down on running backs, especially over the last month, giving up the second fewest fantasy points per game. The Giants' offense is sputtering, and they are likely going to be in a trail position, which means they're going to have to throw the football. So even with increased touches, I just can't get in on Wayne Gallman.
Well, now you have me concerned because it says rank on board, and I don't know if you noticed, but this week in Las Vegas, the Circa opened, and they've got that stadium swim, and they've got screens that show the NFL Network, and my name's going to be like 90 feet tall saying on board. But Marcus, you've concerned me because what I'm actually thinking is I want a running back who's going to get the opportunity, and I know the matchup is terrible. But sometimes, listen, it's a desperate time, Marcus. I'm sorry. I would love to take this flight or this train later. I think I have to take it this week, unfortunately.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. It's time for my 5. And with Halloween just 2 days away, today I'm going to bring you my 5 treats that could trick you. Now, these are fantasy studs that could end up dropping candy corn or something else gross into your trick or treat bag. Mossy, hit me with number 5. It's Ezekiel Elliott at the Eagles. Now, he only had 6 fantasy points versus a Washington football team last week. The injury-depleted Cowboys O-line has been struggling, and that's impacting the run game and the passing game, along with their rotation of quarterbacks. Zeke is facing the Eagles, which could look good on paper, but they're allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this season. Number 4, Rank, I know you were just hyping him, but it's George Kittle at the Seahawks. I love this guy, but stats don't lie. Though Kittle is the number 1 tight end in fantasy, he may struggle against the Seahawks, who have not allowed a top 10 fantasy tight end this entire season. Kittle had a monster game a few weeks ago when he returned for injury, but he hasn't been as productive the last few weeks. All right, number 3, Devontae Parker versus the Rams. Now, guys, this will be Tua's first NFL start, so we will miss that consistency that we were used to with Parker and Fitzmagic. Parker was also limited in practice today, which is not a good sign coming off of a bye week and ahead of a game versus such a tough defense. Now, speaking of this defense, the Rams have allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. Number 2, it's Julio Jones tonight against the Panthers. Now, this one's a hot take because why on earth would you ever not be able to produce Julio Jones? But it's his consistency. Julio has had 2 games with 24-plus fantasy points, but he's also had 2 games with less than 8 fantasy points. The Panthers' defense is also pretty sneakily good against the pass this season, allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers. All right, drum roll. Number 1, Russell Wilson versus the 49ers. I know I'm crazy on this one because obviously Russ has been cooking all season long, throwing at least 2 touchdowns in every single game this season. His highest touchdown game being 5 tutties in back-to-back weeks back in weeks 2 and 3. But this week, it could be different. The 49ers have only allowed 1 top 10 fantasy quarterback in their last 6 games. Plus, it's a divisional matchup, and we all know how those could go. So temper the expectation on Russ. All right, those are my 5 treats that could trick you this week.
I don't know no Brown on this every day. Brown. A.J. Brown is a blur. Si, senor, A.J. Brown. When it was on, they wanted me gone, boy. I'm here to stay.
Adios.
Devontae Adams, the most dangerous of all the Packers wide receivers.
Walk there with the whole team and we riding on.
Touchdown, Tampa Bay. Great throw by Brady.
We got momentum. We'll try to stop it.
A 70-yard strike from Herbert. Incredible. Tyler Boyd snatches it in traffic. Touchdown! Perfect pass from Russell Wilson. A 47-yard shot
He is so good.
Yeah, that track still slides. Another week of heavyweights in fantasy as Cynthia brings her knockout punch in Projection Junction. This week, we are focusing on some of those guys who were beasts in Week 7 and wanting to know if they can do it again in Week 8. So we'll start with the guy who was the QB1 in Week 7. That was Justin Herbert, who has been red hot. He's facing the Denver Broncos. What are you projecting for him?
I have 281 passing yards, 2 touchdowns projected for him. He is in my top 10 squarely. I don't love that one of his O-linemen showed up on a potential injury/COVID situation, so keep an eye on that one. However, I think this is going to be a nice outing for Herbert in Denver, a nice big fantasy output, just like that pumpkin wipe that we had going into the last thing. It just makes me happy.
All right. Next up is Tom Brady. TB12 was QB3 last week. Now he gets the Giants on Monday Night Football. What do you think for him?
Yeah, I have 290 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. A really nice projection again for him. I think you could maybe even argue potentially 3. Just depends on the pace in this game. I don't necessarily think that, this is going to be a game where the score is high, elevated like last time. So just be mindful that the output will reflect the fact that they're going to be playing with the lead. So potentially a lot of running yards in the second half.
Alvin Kamara has been pretty much unstoppable all season long. He was the RB3 last week. This week, though, he gets a tough Bears defense in Chicago. Can he keep it rolling?
Yeah, he absolutely can keep it rolling. Just, look, Chicago has been tough, especially to those pass catches to running backs, but this is a special player. I would downgrade his projection just a little bit from what you're seeing on the screen here if Michael Thomas plays, give a few more of those receptions to Michael Thomas and a few fewer to him. However, I still think this is the difference between RB number 1 by 5 points or RB number 1 by 3 points, something like that.
All right. Last week, Tyler Lockett went kaboom. He was your wide receiver 1 with 3 touchdowns. Now he gets the Niners on Sunday. How do you figure for him?
3 more touchdowns. Just kidding. Just 1 touchdown, but 7 receptions for 78 yards in this one. I think this is really going to be one of those situations where you want to see the deep passes and who the deep passes go to. So Tyler Lockett is the key there because the Niners defense has been stingier to passing yards overall. So Tyler Lockett on those deep situations is where it's at.
Speaking of going kaboom, Devontae Adams had a huge week. He was the wide receiver 2 last week. Now he faces off with the Vikings, who have been pretty generous. How does he fare?
Yeah, he has a really nice day after Halloween coming up. 8 receptions, 82 yards, and a touchdown. Minnesota is allowing the most receiving touchdowns a game to wide receiver this season at 2. Now, let's be honest, he could have 2 himself here. My model rarely projects more than 1 touchdown, but this one is actually something like 1.17. So of all of the wide receivers, he has the best odds of having 2 touchdowns in this matchup.
All right, over to tight ends. The tight end 1 was rookie Harrison Bryant. Now he gets the Raiders. Does Bryant double up this week?
Double up. I think that 3 receptions, 41 yards. Okay, I'm not saying he's going to have a touchdown. I'm saying I don't necessarily think the projection is right there. We're not exactly sure what to expect in the OBJ-less offense. So let's just say it is a great opportunity. You're absolutely playing him. Expect the upside, but just plan for a nice median projection.
All right, we'll finish up with Rob Gronkowski, who was the tight end 2 last week. What do you think for him against the Giants?
3 receptions, 49 yards, and the touchdown. Another good performance for Rob Gronkowski. This is really, look, it's about who leads Tampa Bay in targets since week 3. Who's the answer to that? It is Rob Gronkowski. So for me, it's likely in this matchup that he's going to be one of the recipients of those 2 passing touchdowns. And again, maybe Mike Evans will be the other one.
Looking like we might have underrated Gronk when it comes to fantasy this year. Thank you, Cynthia. Appreciate that. All right, it's time for you to get your anonymous Twitter burners out and just ask us some questions, for your friend. We know how that works. You send us over your Week 8 questions, and we try to answer them as best as we can. So, Rank, this first one is for you. It is coming from William, who wants to know Fulgham, DJ Moore, or Fournette for flex in a PPR league.
Oh, Billy, you know what? DJ Moore's going to score 21 points tonight, and you're going to be mad at me. But I would go with Travis Fulgham, who's going to probably end up scoring like 23. I think that over the last couple of weeks, he's really proven himself to be the Eagles' top receiving option. He's averaged close to 20 fantasy points per game, 21 since week 5. The Cowboys' defense has allowed a top 12 wide receiver in 6 consecutive games, so I'm all about Travis.
All right, Kimmy, this one's for you from Dylan S. Pumpkins, who's David's brother, presumably. Might sound crazy, but Carson Wentz or Lamar Jackson?
Ooh, this is crazy, but the Steelers shut down Lamar Jackson last season, and they've basically shut down every opposing quarterback since. Wentz, on the other hand, has been turning his season around and does have the better matchup going against the Dallas Cowboys. So I know it sounds crazy to bench Lamar Jackson, but I'm going to rock with Carson Wentz on this one, who will be guaranteed to get you some fantasy production this week.
Wentz wagon has gotten back on the road lately, for sure. All right, Cynthia, this one for you from VJ asking McKinnon or Hyde in a full PPR?
I think it's VJ Pumpkin, and my answer is Hyde. Why? Because McKinnon's been losing touches to Hasty, and Hyde, if Chris Carson isn't playing, is going to have volume. Is the matchup good? Absolutely not. Do I feel comfortable saying that I love this one? Not going to happen. However, I do take volume over potential not volume any day of the week.
All right, this next one from Eric saying, should I start Diggs or Justin Jefferson, knowing that New England's DB Stephon Gilmore is going to be following Diggs all game long? Look, I understand what you're saying, Eric. I'm still saying you should start Stephon Diggs just because the Bills, I think I trust their passing game more than I trust the Vikings passing game. We've seen Kirk Cousins struggle with bad matchups. This is not a great matchup for him. On top of it, the Packers have been a lot softer against the run. So this could be a week that Minnesota starts to get Dalvin Cook more involved. Meanwhile, Stephon Diggs still seeing plenty of targets from Josh Allen, who even in his bad weeks has still had 300 yards. All right, back to you, Adam Rank. Julianne asking, saying, I have Bell and CEH. I'm tempted to play them both or play Henderson over one of them.
Oh, you know what? I'm glad that you asked this question, because what I need you to do right now is to watch Fantasy Bites after this show. You can watch it on the all-new NFL Fantasy app. I go right into this very same question, and I also have a rant on Travis Fulgham, too, so you won't want to miss it.
Wow. I wouldn't even say shameless self-promotion, just self-promotion. I dig it. Totally on board with
There's
that.
no
All right.
shame here.
These are Week 8 predictions that might leave some folks scratching their heads. Adam Rank, give us yours first.
Call me crazy, but Henry Ruggs will land in the top 5 of fantasy wide receivers this week going up against the Cleveland Browns. I know he's not targeted a lot. He's not given a lot of opportunity like Nelson Aguilar, but the Browns have allowed the second most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season, the third most receiving yards per game to wide receiver. I just think this is a perfect opportunity for him to get deep and Derek Carr to take some shots in this game.
You know what's a perfect opportunity? You know what's a perfect opportunity? For 3 rookie quarterbacks to end up in the top 12. That's Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and of course Tua Tagovailoa. This will be the first time since 1971 that 3 quarterbacks drafted in the top 6 are starting in the same week, so they might as well get these fantasy points. And by the way, one of those quarterbacks was Arch Manning. That guy's a sophomore in high school, but his grandfather, Archie Manning, was one of those.
All right, I'm going to stay on the quarterback train here, and this one's a little sad. Call me crazy, but Josh Allen will not be a top 20 fantasy quarterback for the first time this season. Weeks 1 through 4, he was averaging almost 30 fantasy points, but weeks 5 through 7, only 15. He's going up against the Patriots. They haven't allowed they've only allowed one top 15 fantasy QB this entire season. So I'm fading Josh Allen this week.
That was my stat.
I don't care. I don't care, Rank.
But Devontae Adams is going to go up for a 50-burger this week against the Vikings. He had 41.6 against Minnesota in week 1. He had 44.6 against Houston last week. I'm telling you, look for 200, 3 tutties, about 15 catches. It's going to be bananas for Devontae Adams, which means if you're playing against them, sorry about your loss. Anyway, that'll do it for this edition of NFL Fantasy Live today. Join us tomorrow, though, where it is going to be our Sunday showdowns. We're going to have all the games previewed, plus who is haunting your roster. We'll have a team of ghosts. That's tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you then.